He took $40,000 of her savings, the deposit on the kitchen she'd been planning for 11 years, and told her, with his hand on the doorframe, that she'd never see a contractor finish the job. She thanked him, walked him to his truck, and then, very calmly, she explained that she was a paralegal. Tonight, 5 stories pulled from the deepest threads of the internet. 5 people who heard the same kind of sentence. No exceptions. You can't do anything about it. This is just how it is. And then went ahead and did something about it anyway. Some of these you'll laugh at. One of them might keep you up. A tech worker forwards a single email and watches a manager get walked out of the building by Friday. A woman opens an envelope that wasn't addressed to her and learns the man she's marrying has been investigating someone in her family for 2 years. A bookstore clerk takes a graveyard shift at a shop nobody in her town has ever called by name and finds out near 2 a.m. what they really sell there. A grandmother sits down in a metal folding chair across from a social worker she has never spoken to before and pretends not to be hiding a tape recorder. And a paralegal in a blue cardigan files the most patient, expensive complaint of her life. Our first story comes from MaliciousCompliance. The narrator, we'll call him Marcus, had been working in the IT operations department of a regional logistics company for almost 5 years. Marcus's team kept the company's shipment routing software alive. It wasn't glamorous work, but the software handled around 600 truck routes a day, and when it broke, somebody at corporate paid attention. So when a new operations director, let's call him Brad, was transferred in that summer, Marcus and his team were briefly hopeful that finally somebody upstairs might understand how their job worked. That hope, Marcus says, lasted exactly 6 business days. Brad's first all-hands meeting was on a Wednesday. He stood at the front of the conference room with a clipboard. Marcus says he later realized Brad always carried a clipboard whether he needed it or not, and announced that he had reviewed the IT department's policies and found them, in his words, shockingly informal. Going forward, every change to the routing software, no matter how small, would require a written change request ticket, approved by Brad himself, personally. Marcus says one of the senior engineers tried to point out that they sometimes push 40-something tiny adjustments a day, little tweaks to the order in which the algorithm picked up packages from the loading dock, and that requiring a clipboard signature on each one would mean nothing actually shipped on time. Brad cut him off. I said no exceptions. That includes routine. If you can't comply, you can't work here. Marcus and his team went back to their desks. They had a brief, very quiet conversation, and then Marcus opened a fresh ticket and titled it, Adjust Truck 01247 from aisle 14 to aisle 13. Predicted savings, 8 seconds. He marked it as critical priority and sent it to Brad's queue with a request for written approval. 3 minutes later, he opened another. Adjust Truck 0301 from aisle 6 to aisle 5. Predicted savings, 4 seconds. Critical priority. Brad's queue. 12 minutes after that, he had pushed 61 tickets. The other engineers had each pushed somewhere between 40 and 70. By 11 a.m., the queue contained over 400 change requests, each marked critical, each requiring Brad's review. Brad sent a furious email at 11:14 telling everyone to stop. He used the phrase, obviously this isn't what I meant. Marcus replied in writing, asking Brad to clarify which exceptions to the no exceptions policy he wanted formalized. Brad did not respond. Marcus filed another ticket. Pending clarification on exceptions to no exceptions policy, awaiting written approval. By Thursday afternoon, the routing software hadn't received a single approved change in 24 hours. The dispatch floor had started routing trucks manually, pen and paper, like it was 1994, and they were running an hour and a half behind schedule. The regional director called Brad personally. Marcus could hear it through the office wall. What Marcus could not yet hear, but would learn the next morning, was the contents of the email Brad sent to corporate at 4:47 p.m. Thursday. An email that, by Friday morning, had Brad's badge deactivated before he reached the elevator. And it wasn't the policy that did it. It was one specific sentence Brad chose to include in writing when he asked corporate to override the IT team's insubordination. Brad had written, I told these people their medical accommodations didn't matter and that they should comply or quit. One of the senior engineers on the IT team, the one Marcus said had tried to interrupt the all-hands meeting, had a documented disability accommodation in his employee file. He had been there for 19 years. By 9:30 Friday morning, Brad was being walked to the parking lot by an HR rep. By 10 a.m., the senior engineer Marcus mentioned was sitting in a quiet office, speaking with a corporate lawyer who used the phrase documented hostile work environment toward a protected class employee twice. Marcus says the rumor on the floor was that the settlement that lawyer eventually negotiated was somewhere in the high five figures. Marcus's last line on the post, "We never saw a clipboard on that floor again." Brad's mistake in the end was putting it in writing. Our next narrator's mistake was different. Hers was opening an envelope that didn't have her name on it. This story comes from AITAH. Our narrator is 28, engaged, scheduled to be married in October. She wrote this post on a Tuesday night, alone in her parents' guest room. She and her fiancé had been together for 4 years. By every external metric, things were good. They had bought a small house outside the city. They had 2 cats, both rescues. Her parents loved him. His parents had flown in twice. The wedding was 41 days away. 3 weeks before this post, she was sorting the household mail at the kitchen counter, which was something she did every other day because her fiancé worked nights and was usually still asleep when the postal worker came. There was a thick manila envelope on top of the pile. Her name was not on it. His name was not on it. The name on the envelope was a private investigation firm she had never heard of. She looked at it for a long moment, she says, and then, against every instinct that told her not to, she opened it. The folder inside contained photographs, roughly 40 of them. They were date-stamped over the past 2 years. They were of her younger sister, her sister at the gym, her sister leaving an apartment building, her sister on what looked like a date, her sister at her own wedding rehearsal 6 months ago, taken from an angle our narrator says she did not remember anybody being at. There was a written report. It was 23 pages. It detailed her sister's daily schedule, her current residence, her vehicle, her workplace, her romantic partner of 14 months, her financial accounts to the extent they were observable, and the line our narrator says she will not forget, subject's contact patterns with sister of client, 29F. Sister of client. Our narrator was the client. Her fiancé had been paying a private investigation firm for 2 years on a retainer she calculated worked out to about $1,100 a month to surveil her sister. And by extension, the report made clear her. She closed the folder. She put on her coat. She drove to her parents' house an hour and a half outside the city, and she did not call her fiancé. He woke up that afternoon and called her. She answered on the 8th ring. She told him, very evenly, that she had opened a piece of mail that wasn't addressed to her. She asked him if he'd like to explain. He paused, and then he said, these are her words, "Okay, I think we should talk in person." He drove out that night. What he told her, sitting at her parents' kitchen table at 10 p.m. with the wedding 40 days away, was not what she had braced herself for. It was in some ways much stranger. He had not been having an affair with her sister. He had not been planning to leave her. The reason he had paid $1,100 a month for 2 years to surveil a woman he had only met 3 times, in his words, came down to a single conversation he had overheard at a Christmas dinner in 2024. He had overheard our narrator's sister tell their cousin, in confidence, that she suspected our narrator's fiancé of being the same man she had matched with on a dating app 2 years earlier, under a different name, a different photograph, and a different city. Her sister had not yet told our narrator. She had been gathering proof. Our narrator's fiancé had hired the investigators not because he was hiding an affair with her sister. He had hired them because her sister had been right, and he had been trying methodically for 2 years to figure out exactly how much she had documented before he had to decide what to do about it. Our narrator says she will spare us the rest of that conversation. She drove him out at 11:15 p.m. The wedding is canceled. The post is titled, "AITAH for showing my sister the folder before I left him." 3,700 commenters told her, in slightly different phrasings, that she was not. The next narrator was not, by her account, married, engaged, or even seeing anyone. She was 23. She worked nights. And one of those nights at a register she had been told nobody really used, somebody walked in to ask her about a book that, by every record she could find, had not been on the shelves for 31 years. This story comes from nosleep. The narrator says she will not name the bookstore, the town, or the previous owner. She also says she has not gone back since. The bookstore sits in what she calls the older part of the town, a row of brick storefronts on a side street that gets foot traffic only during the Saturday farmers market. It sells used books, almost entirely fiction. It is open 11 hours a day, 5 days a week, with a single overnight shift on Friday into Saturday that until our narrator was hired, the owner had been working alone. The owner is a woman named, she says, her aunt. Not her aunt by blood, her aunt by long-standing family friendship. She had needed a job. The aunt had needed help. The arrangement was simple. Friday overnight ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. The official reason for being open during those hours was that, on Saturday mornings, the farmers market drew people who liked to browse before everything else opened. The narrator says she found this explanation slightly thin, since most of the customers she saw on those overnights came in between midnight and 3 a.m., and they almost always knew exactly what they wanted. It was 1:47 a.m. on her fourth Friday alone in the store when the bell over the door chimed. She looked up. A man, 60s, maybe early 70s, in a long wool coat that she remembers as smelling like cedar, walked directly to the counter. He did not browse. He did not look at the shelves. He looked at her face for a long second, and then he asked her, by exact title, for a book. The title was specific. It was a 4-word phrase, the kind of title literary fiction sometimes carries, and our narrator says she repeated it back to him to make sure she had heard correctly. He nodded. He waited. She looked it up in the store's inventory system. There was no record of it. She looked it up in the wider trade catalog. There was a single record, a small press novel, 134 pages, published in 1992 by a regional publisher that had folded in 1994. There was a note in the trade record that read, "Out of print since 1994, final known retail sale, 1995. The man was still standing at the counter watching her face. He said, and our narrator says she remembers this exactly, "I bought one here in 1995. I'd like another." She told him she didn't have it. She told him the publisher was gone. She offered to look in the basement stockroom. He told her kindly not to bother. And then he asked her in the same tone whether her aunt had told her about the back closet. She had not. The aunt had not, in 5 weeks of training, mentioned a back closet. She had mentioned the basement, the office, the second-floor reading room, the bathroom, and, twice, the alarm system. There had not been a back closet. The man waited for her to answer. When she didn't, he gave her a small, patient smile and asked her, instead, if she would mind calling the aunt to ask. The narrator says she pulled out her phone. The aunt, who had never been awake at 1:50 a.m. in the 7 years our narrator had known her, picked up on the first ring. The narrator put her on speaker. The aunt's voice came through the phone, very clearly, and what she said was the part that, our narrator says, she has not been able to stop thinking about since. The aunt said, "Tell him the keys are taped behind the third drawer of the front desk. Tell him I'm sorry I made him come this late, and tell him I'll be there in 15 minutes. The narrator says she watched the man take the keys, walk past the counter, walk past the children's section, walk into a part of the store she had never seen anyone walk into in 5 weeks, and disappear behind a section of shelving she had genuinely believed, until that moment, was a structural wall. The aunt arrived 12 minutes later, in pajamas and a heavy coat, did not explain anything, told our narrator to take the rest of the night off, and asked her not to come back the next Friday. She did not. She quit the next Monday. She is posting this from a different town entirely. The post's last line, "I do not know what they were selling that night. I just know they were not selling fiction." Sometimes the people who cross a line you've drawn are strangers in a long wool coat. Sometimes they are members of your own family. Our next narrator's intruder had access to her last name, her medical history, and her home address. She also had a nickname for our narrator's unborn child. This story comes from JUSTNOMIL. Our narrator is 34, married, and, at the time of the events described, 6 months into the foster-to-adopt process for a child she will refer to only as P. She and her husband had been on the foster-to-adopt waiting list for 18 months. The agency they were working with required, before any placement, a series of joint counseling sessions with a state-licensed social worker. The sessions were private. The social worker, let's call her Miss Reyes, was assigned by the agency. Our narrator and her husband had attended 4 of these sessions before the events of this post. They had not told their extended families that the process had begun. The agency had explicitly counseled them not to. It was their 5th session, a Tuesday morning, when our narrator arrived early, signed in at the front desk, and found Ms. Reyes already meeting with someone in the conference room. The someone was our narrator's mother-in-law. Our narrator's mother-in-law had not been invited. She had not been told the agency's name. She had not, as far as our narrator and her husband knew, been told the foster-to-adopt process was happening at all. She was sitting at the conference table across from Ms. Reyes in what our narrator describes as a very nice sweater holding a binder. The binder was open. There were photographs in the binder. Some of the photographs were of our narrator's husband as a child. Some of the photographs were of our narrator and her husband on their honeymoon. Some of the photographs were of the inside of our narrator's home, which our narrator was reasonably sure had only been visited by the mother-in-law on 3 occasions, and during which our narrator had not seen her with a camera. Our narrator stood in the doorway. Ms. Reyes looked up. The mother-in-law turned, saw our narrator, and said, "These are her words. Oh, sweetheart, sit down. We were just talking about the nursery." Our narrator did not sit down. She walked back out of the conference room, into the lobby, where she sat on a bench for 90 seconds, waiting for her hands to stop shaking. Then she walked back in, told Ms. Reyes that she would like a private conversation, and asked her, directly, what exactly her mother-in-law had told the social worker about her. Ms. Reyes's answer, our narrator says, included a phrase she has not been able to forget since. Ms. Reyes said, "She told me you'd been struggling with the medications and that the household had become unstable. She said she was here to make sure the placement was being supervised by someone clear-headed. She brought letters?" Our narrator was not on any medication. There was no instability. The household was, by every external measure, the kind of stable her mother-in-law had spent 10 years complaining was not spontaneous enough. The letters in the binder, when our narrator was finally allowed to see them, were forgeries. Most of them were addressed to the mother-in-law from concerned family. None of them existed in our narrator's family. She and her husband fired the mother-in-law from their lives at the end of that session, a phrase she uses literally. Her husband used it on the call he made walking out of the office. The agency, after a follow-up review, confirmed that the mother-in-law had been impersonating concerned family since at least the 2nd session. The placement of P went through, in our narrator's words, on schedule and clean. The mother-in-law has not been told the child's name. Some boundary violations get caught at a counseling office front desk. Some don't get caught for 2 years. Our last story tonight is about a woman who watched a contractor walk away with $40,000 of her savings, took 6 months to dismantle his entire business, and didn't raise her voice once. This story comes from AITAH ProRevenge. Our narrator is 56, recently divorced, and, by her own description, a woman who has waited a long time for the kitchen she always wanted. She had spent 11 years saving for the renovation. The savings account had a name. The name was, in her words, Kitchen 2026. She had picked the contractor, let's call him Lou, through a friend's recommendation after a 30-minute interview in which he wore a clean polo and quoted her a price she felt was fair. She paid him a $40,000 deposit on a $65,000 contract. He cashed the check on a Friday. He arrived on Monday with 2 workers. They demolished her kitchen, fully, professionally, over the course of 2 days. They left on Wednesday afternoon, saying they'd be back Thursday with the cabinetry order. They did not come back Thursday. They did not come back Friday. They did not pick up the phone. She drove to the address listed on his business card the following Monday. The address was a UPS store. She drove to his secondary office listed in the contract. It was a strip mall vape shop. Both, she says, were sufficient information. She did not yell. She did not, she says, even raise her voice on the phone when, 3 weeks later, Lou finally called her back to say, very calmly, "Look, the project's not happening. You're not getting the deposit back. There's nothing you can do about it. I've done this before. People give up. Save yourself the time. Our narrator thanked him for his clarity. She hung up. She opened a notebook. She was, before the divorce, a paralegal. She had been a paralegal for 26 years. What followed she describes with the kind of patience that, in her telling, only people who have spent 26 years filing other people's paperwork can really achieve. She did not call a lawyer immediately. Lawyers cost money she'd rather use to rebuild the kitchen. She filed in order a complaint with the state contractor licensing board, citing the specific clause Lou had violated in his license bond. A consumer fraud complaint with the state attorney general's office, attaching the Wednesday demo invoice and the Friday no-show timeline. A small claims filing for the deposit plus demolition damages. An IRS Form 3940A, which she clarifies calmly, is the form for reporting a contractor who is suspected of working off the books for cash deposits and not declaring income. A complaint with the State Department of Revenue regarding the same, a Yelp review, a Google review, a Better Business Bureau filing, and finally a polite, well-formatted letter to every single recent customer of his business that she could find in his online portfolio, attaching her invoice and a copy of her small claims filing, and asking them, very politely, to confirm that their projects had been completed as contracted. 3 of those customers responded that, no, actually, theirs had not. 6 months after the demolition crew walked out of her kitchen for the last time, Lou's contractor's license had been suspended pending investigation. 2 civil suits in addition to hers had been filed. The state attorney general had opened a formal inquiry. And there was one final development, the one our narrator describes as the only piece of the whole sequence she allowed herself to enjoy, that arrived on a Tuesday morning in the form of an envelope from the IRS. The IRS had selected Lou for an audit. Form 3949A reports, when filed with documentation, are taken seriously. The audit, our narrator says, did not turn out well for him. She got the deposit back through the small claims judgment. She got the demolition damages back through a settlement with his license bond insurer. She got the kitchen built 8 months later by a different contractor, one she chose without a single online recommendation. And she had, by her count, written exactly 4 polite emails the entire time. The post's last line, "I think the only thing that ever surprised him was how little of it I had to invent." 5 stories, 5 people who heard the same kind of sentence. No exceptions, you can't do anything about it, this is just how it is. And went ahead anyway. Patient, methodical, often quiet. If any of them landed for you, you can find more like them every Tuesday at 2:30 Eastern and every Friday at 12:30 Eastern. We rewrite them, we repaste them, and we credit the original posts in the description below. Thanks for listening. Sleep well. Most of these people eventually did. Chapters. Jason. Chapters. The title. The clipboard manager. Start word. 100. Subreddit. Malicious compliance. Permalink. Malicious compliance. Comments. Pilot. Story. The clipboard. Title. The folder that wasn't addressed to her. Start word. 1370. Subreddit. AITAH. Permalink. AITAH. Comments. Pilot 1 story. The folder. And our title. The bookstore back closet. Start word. 2780. Subreddit. No sleep. Permalink. Our no sleep. Comments. Pilot 1 story. The bookstore. Onanashana title. The conference room intruder. Start word. 3970. Subreddit. JUSTNOMIL. Permalink. Our JUSTNOMIL. Comments. Show Pilot 1 story. For the conference room. Born-us title. The paralegal in the blue cardigan. Start word. 5100. Subreddit. ProRevenge. Permalink.